Well, I'd like to be able to say today that the GOP is finally getting it. I'd like to be able to say that our conservative movement is gaining traction and influence in higher levels of government. I'd like to be able to say that, but I can't, at least not completely. And why is this? Well, because yet again, at least the House Republicans are blowing another golden opportunity, and it's you and I that are going to be the worse for it if it doesn't turn around. As President Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill makes its way through our legislative chambers, we are seeing in the plain light of day just how committed the GOP is to things like fiscal responsibility, for example, or the lack thereof. Now, I know I'm supposed to tell you about the restrictions on Medicaid and no tax on tips and cuts to green energy scams and so on. And I'm supposed to cheerlead the bill and the GOP. I'm supposed to move them along with sayings like, hey, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? Or this is the best we can do right now. Or if we don't pass something, we're going to lose our tax breaks and our tax cuts. But don't you get tired of hearing those excuses? I know I do. And as the big, beautiful bill is being reviewed by the Senate, some senators, GOP senators, in fact, Ron Johnson, Rick Scott, Rand Paul, they've all said they're a no vote on the bill in its current form, citing the additional trillions of dollars the bill adds to America's national debt, the raising of the debt ceiling. And of course, every year in every election cycle, we hear our politicians tell us about how they're going to cut spending. Even Trump's deputy chief of staff has said on social media that the bill actually reduces the debt and deficit. But year after year, the debt grows. And don't just take my word for it. Take a look at this. Now, this is a screenshot video I took from Investopedia.com, and it outlines America's national debt since 1929. That's the year of the stock market crash that brought us into the Great Depression. Now, you'll notice that, save for a handful of years as they scroll up the screen, that our debt has steadily grown with every president, with every administration, with every Senate, with every Congress. What you are seeing here is the fruit of our government's fiscal policy over the last 100 years, and it's rotten. If what we're hearing is true, that Trump's big, beautiful bill lowers the debt and reduces deficit spending, then our debt number should be lower than that of last year. But according to projections, it is not. And I'm not trying to make the perfect the enemy of the good, but we're not moving in a good direction, let alone a perfect one. To go with the bill in its current form, that we have to agree that with political marketing and savvy headlines while ignoring to our own peril the effects and outcomes of the policies that we enact. Now, at the beginning of the reconciliation negotiations, if you can call it that, President Trump made it clear that America's entitlement programs, things like Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, and the like, were not to be touched. The only problem is that our entitlements, that it is our entitlements that are the primary drivers of our debt. A debt, by the way, that will sink us as a country in the not-too-distant future if we don't get a handle on this. And unlike an airborne virus, for example, spending is something that is within our control, which means that with every passing year and every passing budget that we neglect to control our spending, we are actually choosing to continue the reckless behavior that will ultimately lead to our demise as a world power, as a prosperous nation. It should be noted that our march toward the economically epic failure of our nation has come in the progressive era of America. This is the era that says government is God, government will take care of you. This is the era that has allowed government to enter parts and details of our lives that it was never intended to. This is the era that has allowed government to redefine family, marriage, gender, sexuality, education, medicine, health, and even what it means to be free. Now, to be fair, I realize it's true. We can't just turn the spigot of our entitlement spending off because too many people depend on it. It would hurt too many people. I'm not trying to hurt people here. But that is the point of this kind of legislation, isn't it? It's to make us so desperately dependent on government that we wouldn't dare vote them out of office. When President Trump's second term started, you'll recall it started with a bang. Countless flurries of executive orders and, of course, DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, led by Elon Musk. Every day we were learning about more and more repulsive and truly indefensible spending by our government. And President Trump's executive orders lifted the government boot off of our necks little by little. In the first iteration of the big, beautiful bill, the DOGE cuts were nowhere to be found, and even President Trump's deputy chief of staff was sending out memos explaining why the DOGE cuts can't be included in the bill. But as I am recording this segment, news has broken just today that the Trump White House is going to send at least some of the DOGE cuts to be included in the big, beautiful bill. And we're going to see what those end up being and what the final bill looks like. As of right now, DOGE cuts notwithstanding, the lasting effects of the big, beautiful bill is the raising of the debt ceiling by another $4 trillion, and by some estimates, an additional $20 trillion added to our national debt, according to recent projections, including, by the way, through the Congressional Budget Office. And I say again, I'm not saying that there aren't good things in this bill, but if we're spending more than we spent last year and we're already broke, we're not getting ahead, are we? This is simple math. This is balancing your checkbook. You and I know this. And all of this is not to mention two other little presents tucked away into the big, beautiful bill that we need to be paying attention to. From Daniel Horowitz, writing for the Conservative Review, there is section 41006, which says, in a plain English way, that carbon dioxide pipelines backed by federal subsidies will get the same privileges as oil and gas pipelines. This includes eminent domain powers and, quote, certificate of public convenience and necessity status, which is just bureaucratic code for we're going to take your land whether you like it or not. Now, carbon pipelines are not oil and gas, not even close. And by the way, carbon dioxide is not a pollutant. The vegetation of the world, even our own atmosphere, depend on carbon dioxide, which of course humans emit every time we exhale. But by trying to convince the world that our very breathing is killing the planet, the climate grifters and their political lapdogs, this time the Republican Party no less, have concocted a pretext through which to seize your land. This provision is certainly in direct response to the brave freedom fighters and ranchers in South Dakota who have steadfastly pushed back against the CO2 pipeline and have been successful at stopping it so far, at least in certain aspects. But now the GOP is stepping in, and they want to make the issue a federal issue more than a state issue so they can once again override the people and keep their coffers full. It's amazing that this is coming from the Republicans. But after all, hey, they need money for the next election. Your vote would be nice, but the money is much nicer. And then the second, section 43201 of the big, beautiful bill, says that states cannot regulate artificial intelligence or data center systems for 10 years. Now, RC and I are going to dig into this section in more detail coming up in the next segment right after the break. But suffice it to say, this is another big tech-fueled and in some cases Arab-funded way to control more land in the heartland. AI data centers require tremendous amounts of power to operate. And with this provision, if a community wants to fight back, they will already have one leg crippled, one arm tied behind their back, and one eye poked out. Once again, brought to you by your friendly GOP. Now, before the last election, I gave a monologue about how I believe America is under a divine judgment. And I believe that's true. And in fact, we've likely been under this judgment for far longer than we would care to admit. But because of our great wealth as a nation, we have been able to insulate ourselves from the full effects of what this judgment means. And I want to submit to you that what our debt is now buying at an exponentially increasing rate and pace is really more insulation from the pain that we know is coming. We can't sustain this kind of spending in debt. But instead of slowing down even the smallest bit, we keep our foot pressed on the gas, full steam ahead. When we have long ago hit the iceberg, pardon me for mixing metaphors here, but we're bailing water. We haven't even deployed the lifeboats yet because the captains of the good ship America keep telling us that the ship is fine. There's no need for the lifeboats. Just keep voting for them. And they'll keep bailing water in secret until their buckets wear out and break. And then, of course, the captains and their friends, their handlers, well, they'll have first dibs at the lifeboats. They'll be okay. But it's us, you and me, who will be looking for the driftwood to float on. Unless, of course, we're willing to surrender what's left of our freedom, because that will be the toll. That will be the price of admission to those lifeboats. And the rest of us can just drown, I guess. Now we've heard that we're supposed to endure short-term pain for long-term gain. And if we could see where the gain might be, we might be okay with that deal. I mean, it's more important to me that America is strong when my kids take the reins. And so I want to know what we need to do to ensure that. Because at this rate, and yes, with the big, beautiful bill, when we get to 2035 and beyond, we're looking at more than $50 trillion in debt. And in that view, I'm not convinced that there is going to be a long-term gain to be had, because if our leaders are willing to do that, well, I can't see this as anything more than political expedience in the pursuit and preservation, of power. And they're happy to keep spending, because for them, your submission to them today is worth you having less freedom tomorrow. And this brings me to the most difficult thing to admit about this whole thing. It's easy to blame Trump, the GOP, the Democrats, the media, whatever, or whomever. But at the end of the day, it's you and me. It's we the people. We keep voting all the same people back into all the same offices, and we've been doing it for years. We the people are the problem here. We lament that we need term limits for the Senate and Congress, and we keep asking them to write themselves that limit into one bill or another. But a criminal is never going to put on his own handcuffs, at least not willingly. And whether or not term limits are legislated, it doesn't matter, because we, the people, are the term limits. We have the ability to vote these people out of office, and yet we don't. I've been saying this for the past 4 years, since I've been doing this show. It started as a little podcast with 3 listeners, to radio and now television. I've been saying that we're in a spiritual war. And it's going to take another great awakening, a spiritual revival to turn this around. I believe the church are the ones who have to lead the way back to freedom and liberty in America. And while some are waking up, the majority of us are still asleep. So what does that mean? Well, it means that right now, at least, there's not enough of an appetite to put forth better quality candidates to exercise, for example, a meaningful primary election battle in many states and the like. And that tells us there are still far too many people who might be complaining about their diminishing freedoms, but who continue to vote for their captors. This is nothing new. In the Faith Focus segment, I'm going to finish this thought. I've got to pause it right here, but I'm going to finish this thought, and we're going to look at the parallels between the nation of Israel, when they wanted a king instead of God, and America. You know, we also want a king instead of God, but distinct from Israel, where they wanted a mighty king they could see, we want to be king ourselves. And in the progressive era, the me era, that's the mantra, right? I am my own king. Well, God has been giving us exactly what we want, hasn't he? And it is just that king, our preferred king, that looks poised to defeat the most powerful, prosperous, and free nation the world has ever seen. We're going to take a look at that, and we're going to take a look at what hope looks like, how we win, and practical, actionable steps we can all take, that we must take, if we truly want to turn around our country. Right now, I want to bring in R.C. Williams for reaction. R.C., I don't think we realize the depth of the trouble we are really in, and why many conservatives see this big, beautiful bill not as God reaching down from the heavens to give us a lifeboat, even though there are some good things in it, but really as a betrayal for what we really want our government to be doing right now, and unfortunately what only they have the power to do in terms of the purse strings of our nation.
Andrew, you've just unpacked the last 2.5 to 3 years of our life as a research business, and obviously with our ministry, Watchmen Action. This is the thing that we've been warning about week after week, and I know people that watch the show were prepared for this coming, but you know, one of the things we say around the office is, I'm sad to be right, and I so want to be wrong on this, but here we are. I want to point out something in particular you talked about with regard to insulating the pain. Juliana and I were at an event over the weekend, and the attendance was down, and the logic was that people stopped coming out because Trump won and they think everything's okay. This is the exact type of behavior that the three of us on this show talked about leading up to the election, and the dangers in doing that. You can't hide from this. You're only going to be able to insulate from it so long, right? And I think that people are now starting to figure that out, and they're also figuring out there's no other way than to deal with this than head on. But it's a sad testament, Andrew, when you went through the history of our nation's debt, to see those numbers, and then to see the litany of excuses as to why it happened. If you or I ran our household finances like the US government, we would be under the jail with a triple life sentence in double solitary confinement forever and ever, amen, right? Because it is downright criminal. And this whole thing, Michael O'Fallon, who is the founder of Sovereign Nations, Michael, as we have a broad, we're broad, he goes very deep on many of these things. And he said something on social media this week that stuck with me. He said, the big, beautiful bill is like Dark MAGA's version of Build Back Better. And in essence, and I know we're going to talk about the AI portion of the bill coming up in the show, but he basically said the same thing we've been saying. You're going to get your technocracy in a red dress instead of a blue dress. And in particular, when we talk about our economies, one of the things that's been tried, and they continue to try, is this idea of, Greenland, Canada, Mexico, Colombia all coming in. And I had explained to somebody last week, I said, because they were rooting for it, I thought it was a great idea. I said, you do realize that about 30 years ago, Bill Clinton proposed the idea of the North American Union, and the currency was going to be the Amero. Oh, I didn't realize that. Well, it's the same thing you're cheering for right now, except your technocracy and your control has a red dress instead of a blue dress. And Andrew, I'll stop with this. Your monologue on this is so important because this is the gut check that we need. And people should share this segment in particular with their friends. This is the gut check that we need to clearly understand that we cannot deify a man or a movement. And this isn't an anti-Trump rant. This is Balls and Strikes as a research business and a TV show that shares the truth. If you keep deifying a man or you deify a movement, you will end up being your own king. And as our father told us, that doesn't end very well.
No. And as we're going to see in the Faith Focus segment in a few minutes later on in the program, the reason we're under this judgment, Trump is not, we focus too much on Trump because he's such a big personality, but he's not really the instrument of the judgment. He's a tool being used as a part of it, but God has given us over to what we want. Yep. One of the reasons why I voted for Donald Trump instead of anyone else, including writing anybody in, was we knew we were looking at either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. And okay, if I'm going into judgment, which king do I want to be under judgment under, right? Which would I have a better shot with? Well, clearly Donald Trump, right? I don't think Trump hates America, but I think that he's just doing what it is he does. He's a little bit amoral. I don't think he has some of the same convictions, maybe that ideologues, and I'm an ideologue, certainly, that we might have. That doesn't, but when it works for us, it's great. But when it doesn't work for us, or when it's puzzling, it is frustrating. And that's part of his, just how mercurial and curious he is as an individual. But nonetheless, I mean, he is the Republican Party. He is right now the quote unquote conservative movement, even though we would make some distinctions there. But when he, the only way he's going to be effective is if we can get him pointed in the right direction, so that the China that he's busting up in the shop is the right China. And but then to do that, we've got to get our senators and congressmen to put enough pressure, and that's where the groundswell ends up stopping, and we're almost in our own way. And then of course we go back to the ballot box every 2 and 4 years and 6 years, and we vote for the same people. And I say all that just to say this: we're the problem here. We, the people, are the problem. We, the people, are the solution, and we're the problem right now. Yeah. And normally you wouldn't go to the problem for the solution, but the way our Constitution is written, we are supposed to be the government. We have abdicated that. We're seeing the fruits of what that happens, and we have to be willing now to have hard conversations about how we're going to get out of this. Because if we don't get out of it. And that to me
Right.
is unacceptable.